So as I mentioned before, I am at Capital One. I lead one of the teams on the consumer banking division. But our team at Capital One is over 400 multidisciplinary roles. We have folks that are UX designers, visual designers, motion designers, service designers, researchers, content strategists. You sort of name it, and we've got somebody here that does it at Capital One. And we have locations all across the US and in Canada and the UK. And really what we try and do here at Capital One is ensure that we're bringing the humanity and simplicity and ingenuity to our products. So we really strive to make sure that we're helping customers understand what's going on with their finances and help put them in control as well. We are working on some really exciting things that you may or may not have seen, but we're starting to think about rebuilding the foundation of banking and starting with data and powering it by AI. So if you guys are interested, we have roles all across the United States, and you can go to CapitalOneCareers.com and take a look. I want to give a moment to Brian Munzer from InVision to talk about what they've been up to as well.
Hey everyone, how are you? Can you hear me okay? Just wanted to take a quick moment because really we want to get to Tom and see what he has to say, because that's where the true value lies. But at InVision, everybody knows the platform, hopefully. Does everybody know InVision is a platform? Awesome. Well, one of the things we've set out to do this year is weave in a little bit more value, and we've added a couple P's to the platform, so practices and people. And that's what really brings us here today, is trying to understand how we deliver more value to you as a community through things like the Design Leaders Forum, through community events just like this. This is not a moment where we're trying to sell you something or put something in front of you. This is a moment where we're truly trying to add value to the community by bringing folks like Tom here to talk about things that are really important to you guys. So we're really excited. We're really happy to be here. We love your feedback. If there's things that you want to see that you think we can participate in or help make better with inside of the design community, that's really where our focus is this year. So thank you so much. I want to introduce Tom Giannattasio, who's going to be our keynote speaker today. Tom.
All right, thank you for that. We'll see if there's actual value delivered here. Well, thank you very much. So I've got a couple of things that I can talk about tonight. I've got a couple of presentations, actually. This is a presentation I had put together that is really about designing tools in a very practical sense. Like, how do we think about designing user experiences for people to do work? And then if we have time, I can also dig into some of the stuff that we've been doing on the studio team that helps us actually deliver on those things. So we'll see how we're doing. So let's begin with this. Did you know that animals are really dumb? They have not figured out how to use tools quite like humans have, right? They've been here roughly as long as we have, yet their technology is significantly behind ours, right? Now, it's not that animals have never used tools before. That's not true. Some of our cousins have learned to use tools pretty well to find food. And even some species that are a little further off from us have figured this out as well. Birds have been known to use tools to actually help them reach food that's out of reach for them. And possibly the most impressive use of tools that I've seen is this. Hopefully the Wi-Fi will behave with it. Probably not. I'll describe it to you, okay? There's an elephant who can paint self-portraits. Has anybody seen this before? That's ridiculous. One, because why can an elephant paint a self-portrait? But two, because who the hell's a zookeeper that was like, you know what? I think that elephant's got some talent. Let's get out. Let's give him a paintbrush and see what he can do. That's crazy, right? So animals can use tools, but what is it that separates us from their technology? And I think Charles Eisenstein sums this up pretty well when he says that What separates us is not the fact that we actually use tools, but that we've learned to continuously improve upon them. And that's been, I think that sums up what I've spent my career trying to do, is figure out how to make tools better. And I thought that might make for an interesting talk. So that's what this talk is all about. My name is Tom Giannattasio. Brian did a really good job pronouncing that. I know it's hard. I'm a Tossie most places on the web. I hope you'll friend me here. We'll be buds. And I've been obsessed with tools for a pretty long time. I started on the web about 23 years ago, designing and building things. And I fell in love with design tools at that point. I later went on to build a career around that. So for a long while, I was working on publishing and helping educate other people on how to use design tools. So I worked with Smashing Magazine for quite a while. I became their editor for design tools. And I helped other people publish content around design tools. I wrote a full-length ebook on how to use Photoshop for web design. Seems funny now, maybe. I don't probably have a Photoshop user still. I got my chance to actually work on tools first about 7 years ago. I was working at an agency here in DC called Include, and we were doing some work for Apple. And Apple was building these tools based on HTML5, which was like super hot at the time. It was just coming out. And they were JavaScript-based tools that were basically design environments for a couple of their different platforms, for iAd and iTunes and iBooks. And so I got the opportunity to help think of new features for those tools, which was really exciting for me. It was like, wow, I'm helping other people create awesome things. There was something about that I really responded to. After a couple of changes in positions there, I ended up at MIT, where I helped them design and launch a platform called edX, which is a massive open online courseware platform. And I was focused on building tools for people learning, and then also for the tools for the professors so that they could go on and manage all of their content. I left after launch and started my own company called Macaw, which built responsive web design software. Anybody heard of Macaw? A couple hands? Okay. Oh, awesome. Cool. That's really great. That was a great experience. A couple years ago, we were then acquired by InVision, and I'm now a director of product design there at InVision. And I'm focused mostly on a new tool called InVision Studio, which is a new design prototyping animation type tool. Anybody have Studio yet? All right. If you don't, you can get it. Find me afterwards, or find Eric or somebody, and we'll help you get it. So anyways, the theme around all of this is that, around my career rather, has been that I've been focused on tools for creative professionals. And in working with those professionals, I've learned quite a bit, because this is an extreme group of folks. They are extremely opinionated about how tools should work, as they should be, because they spend 8 hours a day, every day of the week, working inside of these tools. And so their expectations are much higher than users of, say, a standard sort of web application that people come to once every other week or something. Also, they're extremely talented designers themselves, so they can often tell you what the problems are with your own designs, which is interesting, because they will literally email you with 5,000-word emails and comps and mock-ups and tell you, it should be like that. That's pretty good. So they're not typical users. And the one thing that all of those folks are really after is this concept of flow, right? When they're using a tool, the ultimate experience that we can deliver to them is this idea of flow. And everybody says this, like, I gotta get into flow, right? But what it really means, there's starting to be a lot of research around what flow actually is and what is this state of mind that we can enter. And to sum it up, it's essentially this state of optimal experience, right? Where time seems to distort away, and you become completely focused on the task that's at hand, and you really enter this period of peak performance, right? This is when you do your best work. And so as a tool designer, our job is to make sure that you can get in flow, and then we leave you in there as long as possible. And there's a lot to it, but to sum it up, it's really about balancing these two things, skill and challenge, right? So in order to enter a really deep flow state, the user needs to have a very high level of skill, and they need to be presented with a high enough level of challenge, right? And that's an important piece. It is the balance. So As an example, if you gave me 3 balls and told me to juggle right now, it'd be pretty embarrassing for me, and I'd probably get very frustrated. I can't juggle at all, right? But if you brought a professional juggler up on the stage and said, hey, juggle these balls, they're gonna crush it. Except, after a while, they're gonna get super bored if all they're doing is juggling balls, right? They're gonna fall down below because the challenge isn't high enough, so they're gonna knock out a flow. If you tell them to juggle some chainsaws, I'm gonna guess they enter a deeper state of flow because they don't wanna lose a limb, right? That's what it's about. So there's a few principles that I think are really important when you're designing to balance that skill and challenge within a tool. And the first is to establish a bias. Who are you actually designing these tools for? And it is in your best interest to try to bias along this skill curve for intermediates, right? This is a little counterintuitive because of the way we often do user testing, and we put new things in front of people, and their initial instinct is like, I don't understand this, right? We actually have to let them get up that skill curve first to understand if this tool is actually optimized for the long haul of everything, right? You can't get away from the standard distribution of skill. Some of the folks that come to your tool are going to be beginners. They're just not going to know how to do anything. Most of the folks will be intermediates. So it's in your best interest to say, let's design for those intermediates. Let's test with intermediates, and let's make sure that they have the best possible experience without getting in the way of the professionals as well. So it's a big balancing act. Some of the techniques for doing this, right? So you need to make sure that pretty much everything that you put in front of people is really, really optimized for those different pieces of the skill curve. Including all of the words and colors and symbols that you put in front of people. And I want to do a little test of this to help you understand what I'm trying to say here. What I'd like you to do is stare at that eyeball, and I'm going to flash an image. I just want you to see what you see, right? And tell me what you see. Ready? Did anybody get that? Yes. I'm so happy that you guys got that. When I gave this presentation a couple weeks ago, and that image didn't load. It was great comedic timing. Yes, that is Tim the Toolman Taylor. So I only flashed that for about 100 milliseconds. And you were able to interpret not only that was like a photograph, you knew that not only that it was a human, but you knew exactly who that human was. And if you're anything like me, you probably started thinking about like power tools and grunting and Al Borland and all these other crazy things, right? Images are so powerful and so embedded in our minds that we just instantly understand what we're seeing there. I'm going to do a couple more of these. Ready? A lightning bolt, yeah. You're probably a little bit slower. Like you probably understood generally what that was, but it may not carry quite as much meaning, right? Because you have to build meaning into icons and symbols. They mean different things in different contexts. They're not as preloaded, but they are super powerful. You can interpret them really, really quickly, and then it can be really great shortcuts when you're designing tools. Let's do another one. Anybody? I hear some. Yep. So that was a word, right? And if you thought you understood it, you were wrong, because it's a made-up word. That is a word that my 5-year-old made up. It means both difficult and complicated. I'm not sure where it came from, but I liked it a lot. The point here, though, is that words are very, very specific. Now that you know that this means difficult and complicated, you're probably going to start using it when you get home, probably. But they're super slow to interpret, right? So if you put these in front of professionals, they're like, you're gonna slow them down. If your interface is full of words, it's like, I gotta get them out of the way. Like, I need to move faster than this. So they're really geared for beginners or for adding clarity where necessary. Last one. Anybody catch that? It was just the color red, yeah. I flashed that a little bit faster too, because color is so insanely fast for us to interpret, and we can interpret it when it's in our peripheral vision even, right? So that's really powerful, and so it's really good to use to either call things out or to like indicate system status across an application, because people can recognize it even if they're not focused directly on that, right? And so from there, we can start building some rules, right? Colors are really, really fast and great at system status, like we had said. Words are really clear, and they're great for beginners. They help them understand the content. Icons are really, really efficient, but you have to build meaning into those. And images are really powerful, so you got to be very careful in how you use those things. Let's not forget this one. So I said that the word is defecated, by the way. I don't know if I pronounced that for you. It is not defecated. It's defecated. This is all portrayed really well inside of the Spotify interface. Let's just take a look at this. So over on the left-hand side, they're using words to clarify all of these different sections within the interface. Now, they could have chosen icons there, but these categories are really difficult. They're very, very nuanced. Like, what's the difference between songs and albums? I don't know. Tell somebody to design icons like that, they're like, yeah, whatever. So they're using clarity here to make sure that everybody has an understanding here, and it doesn't really get in the way of people who are like pro users of this tool. In this little call out here, they're using images to build some emotion, make you feel a little bit of something, and to draw a lot of attention. And then they're using colors in two ways. One, to draw attention to what they want you to do. They want you to play that new Childish Gambino song, which you should listen to if you haven't yet. And then they're also using it to indicate where you're at within the application. So they're using this green to mark new releases. They're also doing that over on the side. So immediately you know exactly where you're at inside of the app. Down below, they've got these playback controls. Those are just icons. If you don't know what those mean, you probably don't belong in this room. Everybody understands these. Everybody's already at an intermediate level with this stuff. So we can use icons, no need for words or anything. But then over here on the right, they're doing some interesting things. This little icon right there, I didn't know what that was for a while. You might not either, unless you are really using Spotify quite a bit. That's the icon to like change the speaker at which the sound is coming out of, right? It's a pro level feature. If you put that in front of a new user and said, hey, like figure out how to use the speaker, they'd probably give you feedback of like, I don't know what the hell that was. Put a label on it. But I think that'd be the wrong move, right? It's a pro level feature, and so they're using the signifiers to target specifically the people who it's made for. I think that's really smart. Okay, principle number 2. So we're establishing bias across our application. We still need to make sure that things are as simple as possible for everybody. Even though we're really, really optimizing for those people who are intermediates, everybody should have a good time using the tool, right? The interesting thing about simplification, though, is that if you simplify things for beginners, chances are you're making it more complicated for professionals. So it's like a difficult balancing act. So there's a few techniques here that you can employ to try to simplify everything and get people up that skill curve as much as possible. And the first is, I said mimic because it sounds nicer, but really what I mean is just steal. Steal from the people and the behaviors that have come before whatever you're doing. And if we take a look at design tools, which is one of my favorite type of tools, Photoshop introduced layers in like version 3 or so. At the time, it was super confusing, but now pretty much everybody understands how to work with layers, right? In designing design tools, you'd be pretty dumb not to just steal that pattern because it's super powerful, it's proven, and why reinvent something that really doesn't need to be reinvented? This is a shortcut in that people come into your application and automatically, right, they're probably about in the intermediate zone, which is exactly where you want them. So it's a really powerful way to get people going. Conservation. This is about reusing some of the mechanics inside of your tool to do different things. And I think one of the best examples ever of this probably is the iPod with the click wheel. Man, I love that iPod. And that click wheel, once you learn to like spin your thumb around that thing and just press it at the right spots, you could do everything. The MP3 players at the time sucked. Do you remember those things? They were hideous, and they had a ton of ugly buttons. They were super hard to understand, and then Apple came along with this interface that was just like revolutionary. And you could seek through songs. You could navigate like complex menus really, really easily. It's because they conserved those mechanics into something that's really, really simple. If we take a look at design tools again here, this is the Illustrator palette. I love Illustrator. It's one of my favorite tools, but I'm going to rag on it for a minute. If you want to change the fill and the stroke of a shape, you have a ton of mechanics that you have to understand just to do that, right? There's one box there that's for fill, one is for stroke. You have to click it if you want to change the opacity of it. You've got to go into another palette to manage all of that stuff. And if you contrast that with a tool like Sketch, they're using the exact same pattern for everything, right? You can add fills, strokes, shadows, effects, blurs. Now they just added prototyping, and it's all through this mechanic of like, hit a plus button, now you just edit a couple of those little properties. This is really, really powerful because as soon as you understand that one mechanic, people don't have to relearn how to do all of this stuff. You just say, here's new challenges for you to take on, and they can do it because they know how to use the tool. Abstraction. This is really about making sure that the interface that you put in front of people is mapped to their mental model and not the implementation model that your engineers are probably building, right? This should be kind of a no-brainer, but let's just take a look. We're going to use the best stock photo ever. You may have your own favorite. You're wrong. This is the best one ever. Who built this set? Because it is incredible. Let's just take a moment. Where do you buy a baby office chair? And who's the genius who said, let's just spray paint this Etch-a-Sketch? That looks like a computer. That's amazing. Okay, I'm sorry. I try to work this into as many presentations as possible, by the way. So let's say I want to add a bar on top of this thing. I need to add some content to it. That looks terrible. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a blend mode. And that seems to look better. But what if the interface inside of our favorite tools was like, you had to write that? That's the formula for multiply, right? And it's literally multiplying A and B, the two different layers that are there. That's how it works. We don't think about that because there's an abstraction in place that helps us understand, like, just make it darker. Let's call it multiply. Let's look at this one. That's screen. Why don't we just have an input field inside of Photoshop that says, hey, what kind of blending do you want to do? And you have to write math formulas. So that'd be a great interface, right? No, we don't do that. We build these abstractions around these concepts that help everyone understand what's going on behind the scenes. And yes, you sacrifice some of that power. There might be professionals who really, really want to write their own formulas for blending. They're crazy, but they might want to do that. But these abstractions help pretty much everybody across the skill curve. So it's really powerful in simplifying those experiences. Automation can help beginners perform tasks that they're not really well equipped to take on. And it can also help professionals do the tasks that are really mundane that they don't want to have to think about. And so if we start at beginners and we take a look at this beautiful Bob Ross painting that took 4 minutes to paint, we scanned it in and it's a little dull. So we pop into Photoshop and we say, all right, let's go into curves palette. If you're not familiar with curves, you're probably a little intimidated. What the hell is this jaggedy mountain thing? You don't know how to read a histogram and understand how to manipulate all of the different channels. It's really intimidating. Photoshop understands this, but there's so much power there that we should help those beginners understand how to use this. So they built this little auto feature. You just click that button, analyzes the image, and gives you generally something that's much better than what you had before. This actually works really well, too. They've done a good job on this. What's also great about this is that it teaches those beginners how they should be thinking about using this feature, right? We've given them a head start of like, hey, look, somebody just did this for you. Take a look at what happened, and now you can learn from it. So it's super powerful for beginners. We're using some automation inside of Studio. This is Studio, by the way. And essentially what we do is we allow people to animate between two different artboards. And the way that we're doing that is based on layer name, and there's an algorithm that kind of analyzes all the layers to see what's the same across them and automatically sets up tweens so that you can animate those things. And so then when you go into our timeline editor, you get this consolidated view of all the layers, and it already set up an animation for you. I don't know if you guys are doing animation work yourself, but before some of these types of things, if you're working with Sketch, you've got to take it to some other tool. And if you're using After Effects or something, you've got to set up all these movie clips and all this other kind of shit, right? It's really, really hard. It's very, very time consuming. So this automation is helping those professionals avoid those mundane tasks that we can easily offload for them. Because people are using these interfaces for 8 hours a day or so, ergonomics becomes a pretty serious consideration. Making sure that both their mind and their bodies are taken care of in using your interface. That may sound a little bit silly, but it becomes a legit issue. Wait for it. Wait towards the end. And there's a couple of laws that we can take a look at that sort of help us with this. And the first is Fitts law. It basically says that the time required to get to a target on the screen is a function of how far away it is and how big that item is, right? So it stands to reason that the important functions should be really big and close. That's easy. There's also Hicks law, right, that says the time required to make decisions is in proportion to the number of options that they actually have available to them. So you kind of mix those together, and this is the ideal interface. No, sorry. Oh, I removed it. This is like the ideal interface. A circle with as few options as possible. That's pretty silly. Nobody wants to work inside of a circle, right? But the logic is still sound, right? Put the most important options at 12, 3, 6, and 9 o'clock, and make them as large as you can stand to make them without being, overburdening the interface. And that's why most tools are designed with exactly that, right? A toolbar at the top with the most important things in the center, something on the right and something on the left. The bottom is a little tricky to start adding things in, but that's a totally made up heat map, by the way. But you probably thought that was real. But it's not just the ergonomics of how people move their mouse around on the screen. It starts to become a real consideration of like what's happening outside of the screen as well. And if you've ever used this dialog, does anybody know where this is going? Okay. This is the Save for Web dialog inside of Photoshop. This is the least ergonomic menu to get into imaginable. The keyboard shortcut is Command-Option-Shift-S. Right? This has become like a meme. This is called the Save for Web claw. And it seriously hurts your hand. And you have to save images for the web all the time. What are you doing, Adobe? Are there any people who work at Adobe here? Okay, good. I really love Photoshop. It's a great tool. But that one menu was just ridiculous. Okay, so that's important. Principle number 3 is to be able to adapt. So we're going to try to make things as simple as we possibly can within the interface, but we still need to adapt to different circumstances that we simply can't account for, or we're going to choose not to account for because they're not important enough to surface as sort of like our defaults. And so some of the techniques here is, one is we can just manually allow the user to manually change the interface, right, and actually customize the way that they use the tool. Adobe is fantastic at this, especially with Illustrator and Photoshop, in allowing you to change your palettes. This is super, super powerful. And you go to professionals and everybody has a completely different opinion about what the ideal setup is for their palettes, because these tools are appealing to so many different types of people. So it's really, really powerful. Affinity, by the way, has added personas where you can change personas and they instantly change to different interfaces. This is a good pattern if you're expecting people to be doing a lot of different things inside of your interface. The flip side of that is to try to contextualize as much as you possibly can. So this is usually based upon a selection or the user doing something. So one of the best tools ever made probably is DevTools. And they use this pattern too, right? When you select an element to inspect it, we're just going to show you the styles and everything that's exactly relevant to that selection. Same thing inside of Sketch. You select a layer, we show you everything on the right. Right? So what that's doing is trying to adapt to exactly the task that you're doing at hand so that we can remove that cognitive load on you later on. And finally, one of my favorite tools for adapting to different interfaces is progressive disclosure, in that stepping people through these different gates of complexity within an interface. And so inside of Studio, and to get into that animation workflow that I was showing earlier, we're using this technique to basically say, as soon as you create an interaction between two screens, we show you this menu. And basically what this does is set it up so that if you tap on an element, it just instantly goes to another screen. But you have some options there, and you can change this little type drop down to say some sort of pre-canned animation. I don't want to take on the challenge of fine-tuning an animation, just push left, push right. But if you hit that little motion button right there, we're going to run that algorithm. It's going to connect all your layers. But we're still not giving you the full complex workflow because We don't know that you've opted in for that yet. And there's a good chance you just want to set like delay and duration on this thing and say that it's going to take half a second instead. But if you then hit edit timeline, now we're taking you into a completely different mode that shows you all of the layers and allows you to dive in and move those bars around for each individual layer. And then you can go even further. I don't have it in here, but you can go further and dive down into individual properties of those layers and animate those as well. So what we're trying to do is make sure that the effort that you put into the tool is commensurate with the output that you get from it. And that's what's most important about using that pattern. And it's super, super powerful. So the 3 guiding principles for tool makers is to establish this bias for the users that you think are going to be using your tool the most, right? The largest group of your users, making sure that you're still simplifying things as much as possible for people who are anywhere on the skill curve, and then adapting to those circumstances that you simply can't account for or you're choosing not to. Just a highlight of those techniques that we discussed. And ultimately, the goal is to get people into that state of flow so that they're doing their most productive work. And if they're doing their most productive work, chances are they're going to love you for it, and they'll become loyal customers, which is like what we're trying to do, right? So that concludes the end of that first talk. Now, I do have more that I can dive into, but I don't know how we're doing on time, Jody. Cool. Would you guys like to do more? Excellent. These slides are up, by the way, at designoftools.com. All right, this is going to be hard because I need to use my hand here. All right, let's see where we are. Oh, Zoom. Get out of the way, Zoom controls. You guys are going to see that, aren't you? Oh, bummer. Doing this with a microphone in my hand is pretty funny. This is what I get for making fun of animals using tools. I'm going to seem like a total fool up here. Okay. So what I have in this part of the presentation is actually an amalgamation of different things that I've presented inside of InVision related to Studio or things that are related to how our design team operates. So this is the first time I'm sharing this with an audience that's not InVision. So I hope that you like it, and if you don't, let me know, and I'll never do it again. But basically, what I thought would be fun to go through is how we came up with the general positioning of the tool, and then how our team operates in designing systems really quickly that are pretty complex and hard to understand as we're sort of innovating these new tools, how they're going to be received. So when we first started this product, we started out by analyzing basically everything that was going on inside of the design tools market. I don't know if you pay attention to the design tools market, but there is a new hot design tool every other day. There's a ton of innovation happening in this space. And for us, it's like, well, how do we stand out? And also, how do we dethrone Sketch, basically, right? The tool that people are using to do all of their work. Like people have a very strong attachment to the design tools that they use. How do we even come to the table with something that they're not just like, oh, get out of here, right? And so we established this vision of saying we want to bring design to life. And what we mean by that is this. For a while, people used to believe that the world was flat. I'm sure you knew that, right? Did you know there's people who still believe the world is flat? That's true too. That's weird. But because of many different explorers, we kind of understand, like, that's actually not the case, right? We live on a round planet. And the same sort of thing is happening, I believe, with the screens that we all have in our pockets or at home and everything, right? For a long time, with our tools especially, we've treated this device, the screen, as if it were flat, right? But it's not a flat medium, right? It's a flat interface, but it's not a flat medium, right? And that's an important distinction there. there's a lot of choice that can happen inside of this medium, right? It's interactive. It's also animated. Time is a dimension that's often not thought about inside of our design tools, and we're just working on this large, flat, static surface inside of our tools. And the world started to realize this, that, hey, we need to embrace these other dimensions of design, and we started filling those gaps with these other tools, right? And so you talk to any designer today, there's not one tool that they're using, right? They're probably combining a bunch of tools to try to get some work done. And it's pretty troubling. We have folks on one end, as I said, doing animation inside of After Effects, which is an interactive medium. It's still not reaching all those dimensions. We have other folks who are doing animation inside of Keynote, right? Which is like, well, that's not what it's meant for, but yeah, it works pretty well. And so this fragmentation issue is what we were really trying to solve when we were designing Studio, right? We want to bring design to life by making a seamless workflow with these five pillars. Design, which is what everybody's used to in the general sense of like layout, color, that kind of stuff. But then making interaction a first-class citizen inside of the tool, and also animation, right? You can't really develop UX if you're ignoring these other dimensions of design. They're just as important. And everybody is starting to build systems. More and more complex software requires you to build systems so you can actually scale this stuff. That should be a first-class consideration inside of our design tools as well. And of course, collaboration. Nobody designs in a vacuum, right? Design, if done right, involves everyone in the entire organization. So how do we connect with everybody there? So that's our goal. Now, that is really, really complicated to squeeze into a tool and to design for that. And so what we ended up doing is establishing a number of principles to help us do this. And those are what I wanted to really hit on with this part of it. I'm a firm believer in designing on principles, designing those principles as you go along, in addition to the interfaces that you're actually designing, right? Because principles are so powerful that once you have them established and everyone understands what they are, you can sit back and the team will like self-manage themselves and make decisions day to day based on those principles because everybody agrees upon those. Now we can start making really tough decisions as we go along, and we stand for the same thing as we go. So I'm going to share a couple of the principles that have helped us shape our tools and show how it's actually had an impact. The first should be probably fairly obvious in that work should come first within a design tool, and then tooling should be second. And what that is for us is a little check of like, don't get fancy with the interface, okay? Stay out of people's way. Their work is what's really, really important. I'm about to show you something I'm embarrassed of because this is the first comp for Studio at the time called Scarlet. Ready? Oh, that's not too bad. This is where we started, right? There was a lot of interface going on here. And the white interface was becoming fairly strong. And as we went along, we started saying like, no, we gotta really highlight work first, right? We started moving towards this dark interface because we do believe that it actually, generally speaking, highlights work better for most interfaces, which are typically lighter, right? So it helps elevate that work just by going into a dark interface. Then we started moving more and more out of the way, making as much room as we possibly could inside of the interface for work to actually be there. This version, does this have bevels? For a while we had bevels that were like, oh man, get rid of those things. And then eventually we ended up on this interface. This is where we're at today. And even small little tweaks, like inside of the toolbar, we changed the background to fit the canvas so that it feels like there's actually a lot more room. We're not crowding you down inside of your workspace. We're opening that up so that your work can breathe, right? You can also move those palettes out of the way, and you still have access to a lot of the tools where your focus really, really is on the work there. So constantly striving towards fulfilling that principle that we established is helping us make better decisions on behalf of our users. This is basically us saying that we believe in progressive disclosure. We believe that's a good way to make sure that effort is equal to the output they actually get from a tool. And so we've established this principle of shallow by default, deep by choice. And those words in particular are really important because this is sort of like something we can easily recall, right? Because we could have just said, use some progressive disclosure. But phrasing it in this way, like you hear this around our design org like every other day. People are like, that's not shallow by default. People can recall these throughout the org and say, you're not adhering to our principles. And we do keep ourselves in check with these things. This isn't just lip service. We say this a lot. And so as I talked about before, this is how a lot of our motion workflow ended up the way that it is, allowing people to step in and opt in for more complexity based on their skill level. They can stop whenever they'd like, but they're still getting value. And also that there's really no proxy for experience, right? Building these tools, you simply can't, a designer can't deliver static mock-ups and say, this is generally how it's gonna work, and do some hand-waving around things in between. You need that actual experience of using this tool in flow, right, to understand how well the entire system is actually going to be working. That makes our job as tool designers much, much harder because it means that we've got to build a ton of stuff ourselves to validate all of this stuff. So this is one of the first prototypes for that animation workflow that I showed earlier. It's ugly, I get it, but this was super helpful in us understanding how the mechanics should work, how should layer matching work, what are those algorithms. This is something we could have presented comps and passed over to engineering and be like, figure it out, right? But this is a design task in our eyes. We want to optimize this as much as possible. And so if you were early on in Studio, you actually probably got delivered an interface that was cleaned up, but it looked a lot like this in the sense that like these options were roughly in this space in the interface. That's just us trying to ship fast and continue to validate. Meanwhile, we're actually working on this, which is our timeline, which we were building ourselves as well, to make sure that all of the little mechanics inside of the timeline are working and enabling flow and really hitting on all the things that professionals need out of this area of the tool. It's a lot more work for our design team. So we hire people who can code and can help build these types of prototypes so that we can get this earlier than sending it over to engineering, shipping it to customers and realizing, oh shit, that's not right. It's really hard for us to pivot behaviors that we've established with users. So we're trying to head that off early. This is meant to be a little clickbaity. So a lot of design talks, I think, end with the word empathy, right? And empathy is great. I believe that, as designers, we need to be practicing empathy with our users. But one of the practices that we've established at InVision pretty well goes beyond that, right? And it's like straight up masochism, right? We are taking pleasure in feeling the pain of our users. And we've done that in a couple of ways. We established what we call the Steal It Challenge. And we did this pretty early on in the product lifecycle. Long before it was ready to support this, we said that once a week, we want everybody on the team to spend between half an hour or an hour trying to recreate a design that they steal off a dribble or something, right? Just so that they can get in and feel this. This is not just designers. This is the entire engineering team, our managers, product managers, everybody was doing this. And what it did is a couple of things. Here's a couple examples. Eventually, we got some pen tool working. This is from our engineers. They're learning how to use the pen tool as well. Images came in. Eventually, you started getting really animated and everything. And what it did is it built buy-in from everybody, right? Everybody felt really, really invested in this product because they could feel that actual pain, right? Oh, we can't ship this. I'm really motivated to fix this because I felt the pain myself. That's more powerful than empathy, in my opinion. And if there's ways to establish that in your organization, highly, highly recommend it. We eventually opened this up to the entire product organization at InVision, and we put money on it because it was so powerful. And we said that if you submit one every week, you get $100 just for submitting. And then we're going to vote at the end of the week. And if you win, I think we gave like $500 maybe. Is that right? Like $500 to the winner. Some people won thousands and thousands of dollars because they just kept killing it with this. And we're getting the feedback that we needed, so it was really a cheap price for us to pay, and everybody felt super, super motivated. It was a great program. And then finally, in about January or so, we asked the entire design team to stop using Sketch. That's what we were using before. You have to use Studio. Again, a little bit early. We had just built our entire design system inside of Sketch. And they were like, nope, no more. Time to use Studio. And everybody's like, ah. So they're feeling that pain, which means we're going to feel that pain too. And again, it just motivates everybody to continuously push their products to the point of they feel good about it to ship it out. You might call it dog fooding. I think masochism is a better word because it's a little more like, ooh, that's racy. That actually concludes my talk. I would like to thank you all for having me.
All right, anybody have a question?
Hi, I'm just very curious. Do you actually use this product to design your own product as well?
Yes, that is what we do. Yeah. So this is a screenshot of our sticker sheet for Studio, right? This is what we use to design our product. Now, at the beginning, it didn't exist, right? So we didn't up until a point where we could finally move over, which was probably, I'm going to say we moved over. Our team moved over before all of InVision, probably like a year ago-ish. And at that point, it was like, yes, we have to be using this product now.
And while you are asking people to dog food your own tool, are you collecting any stats for like a beta user analysis and all that?
Are we collecting data on how people are using the tool?
Sometimes people do like beta testing. So is that also something that you guys were doing?
Yes, yes, absolutely.
When you ask
absolutely.
your internal employee to test the tool yourself?
Yeah, and getting this out to actual users, yeah, we started small, right? We started with a few very close people that were friends and family, basically, and they gave us early feedback, and from there we started bringing in more and more people. And now we're still in early access. We're still sort of in our beta doing testing. It's just at a much larger scale than that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Can you talk to us a little bit about the challenges that you faced with some of your users, obviously most being designers, in some of the research or usability testing that you did? I imagine a lot of people had a lot of input and creative ideas around your tools.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is not the final interface, but we initially shipped this and thought, hey, this will actually be a good interface to get us started. This can be our MVP for animation. And basically, we showed all these layers on the left. There was no timeline. You could select individual layers and manipulate some of the animation properties inside of the inspector. And we learned pretty quickly, like, this isn't going to scale, and it's not enough to actually deliver for our GA. So this kicked off much deeper timeline work so that we could deliver on that animation promise. Because this was the number one thing that people were asking for, is like, hey, this solves the animation workflow for us a lot, but it needs to improve, right? And so, yes, users drove this transition for us. A lot more work for us. But
Hi.
Hi.
I have two questions.
Sure.
What did you use to make your first presentation? And then the second question is, what are you guys doing for Sketch users to transition into the studio?
Yeah.
I'm just curious.
Yeah, absolutely. So the question was, how did I build my slides? That's just a custom React framework that I built, so they're coded basically. No tool there. What we're doing for Sketch users is we have an entire team that's basically dedicated to translating the sketch format, which is now open, right, into our studio format so that you can just say file open a sketch file, and it translates all of that over for you. In addition to that, we're also working on, we have a product called DSM where people can build their design systems inside of Sketch. We're also working on translating those design systems over because that's a lot of work. And people, again, it's automation. People shouldn't have to manually do that. So we're building those pathways as best we can because that is, everybody is in Sketch. And this is another adoption shortcut that's sort of like the stealing in a way. We're basically getting people past that initial hurdle of the blank canvas, which is a serious hurdle, right? Because when you open up a new design tool, you draw a couple rectangles and you're like, I don't get it, right? It's easy to stop. But if you say, hey, just open up your sketch file, and from here, just add some animation, people are like, oh, they get to that aha moment a lot faster, right? So that's definitely part of our adoption strategy. Yeah.
So at the beginning, you showed that bell curve of beginner, intermediate, advanced, and you're shooting for the intermediate.
Yeah.
But of course, your audience are designers, so
Yeah.
You can assume a certain level of familiarity with interfaces and that sort of thing. And I'm just wondering, for those of us maybe who design for a broader consumer market, I work on a contract for veterans, for example, who maybe aren't as adept with computer interfaces.
Yeah.
Would that, I guess you would imagine that bell curve would look different, or
I think
that whole curve would.
I'm going to say there's probably still a standard distribution there, or something very similar to it, but it's all relative, right? There's not an absolute beginner and an absolute professional. Our audience is certainly a little skewed towards professionals, but there's still people who are intermediates within that total range of folks that we are trying to appeal to. And so it's our job to understand where those boundaries are between beginner. There's absolute beginner that's a small portion on our bell curve, but we still have intermediates. They may not be absolute intermediates if you compare them to veterans or something, right? It's a much different, it's just a different scale.
Next question.
Yeah.
Hi, I love your idea of feeling the pain of the users by using the tool yourself.
She didn't want to say masochism.
I didn't want to say that, no. But I mean, that's great for, when you're a designer designing
Yes.
a tool for designers, it's very easy to use your own tool. But if you're designing a tool for a skill set that you don't have, so something for data scientists who are doing, modeling, how do you do that same kind of thing?
It's super hard, right? That's very hard. We do have a luxury in that we're designing for ourselves, right? Not everybody can do that.
Mm-hmm.
Fall back to empathy, right? It's just validates the idea that you need to get as close to your users as you possibly can, so you can feel it, even though you won't be exactly that person. Now, ideally, there's probably ways that you can use your interface to make sure that it is working as intended. And running scenarios on yourself as much as possible can be helpful. But obviously, watching people use your tool, don't you feel a little bit of pain when people are using a tool and you're like, oh, you just don't get it. Come on, why would you click that button? So it's masochism by proxy.
Yeah, I'm just curious, since Studio is like a sort of a all-in-one tool with prototyping with animation, and there's the design system manager coming along. Is there any consideration into developer handoff?
Yeah, absolutely. So InVision has a tool called Inspect, where if you sync up your sketch files today, they go into Inspect, and you can go in and pull out all those properties. It's very similar to Zeppelin or our pals from Simply. Shout out. And that the same is true with Studio, right? So when you publish out your prototypes, all of that data goes onto the InVision platform so you can share it. It's built with the same layout and rendering engine that's used inside of Studio, so you get all the animation and all that kind of stuff. And there's a version of Inspect built out on the web, so you can shoot a link to a developer, basically.
Hi, I was wondering if I just started for the last couple of months using freehand, and it's awesome. Just with the global UX team and working with product owners that are not in your same location, right, around the world.
Yeah.
And I'd love to see just the ability to have freehand in here, like an offline freehand that I can just have rough sketching, designs, and then even if I wanted to do like a flow of just that kind of fidelity.
Yeah.
And then have it right here for I can just build it to a low fidelity or high fidelity, right? Do you guys have plans to maybe incorporate anything like that?
So we have an integration with freehand, so you can actually send your designs out into a freehand. It's a little bit different, I think, than what you're asking for. You want to actually, inside a studio, do some drawing, right?
Yeah,
that's something we've talked about. It isn't on the roadmap right now, but it is something we've talked about, and we could probably enable that at some point in the future. I don't know why we wouldn't, because it is a pretty strong use case. By the way, freehand is like a whiteboarding tool that multiple people can go into.
Hey, you talked about sticking with kind of common paradigms. Can you give an example outside of maybe animation, but where you guys decided to kind of break away from maybe our common knowledge of how tools work?
So the question is, where else did we break away from common patterns inside of tools that people are used to?
And why?
Yeah. That's a good question, because quite honestly, stealing is super powerful. And there's so much muscle memory built up inside of people, even down to the key commands, that it's definitely in our best interest to borrow as much of that as we possibly can. So if we are changing from things, we do it very, very carefully. One of the things that Sketch users have pointed out to us is the fact that we actually tweaked a couple key commands. And we'll hear that from Sketch people. To get to your selection tool, you press V. We like that better in Adobe products, instead of just mashing the escape key to try to get back, right? But that was something that we actually started with the Sketch key commands. And over time, people using this tool, there was enough people being like, we have control of this. Why don't we adopt this shortcut that pretty much everybody on our team agreed is better? Generally speaking, it's a little tiny thing, but it is an important shift, we think, that optimizes the workflow overall once people get adapted to this individual tool. Hopefully that answers your question. There's probably others I could think of, but. Oh, okay, yeah, that's a good one. Working with components. Is that the one you were hoping I would say? Okay. Eric, you want to do the rest? Eric is a product manager at InVision, by the way. He's back here. Yeah, so components are basically our equivalent of symbols inside of Sketch. But we wanted you to be able to actually reach in and touch those things to do overrides on them. So instead of just showing a bunch of inputs inside of the inspector, we allow you to dive in and select the layers on those individual things. If you want to change the text, you double-click it and edit it just like it's text. And we do our best to signify that these are components, and changing this is actually an override on this component, and you're not editing the master of that. And then you opt in to edit the master of it, because once you've established a component, chances are you're editing overrides. That's just our way of shifting towards our own bias. Yeah.
So regarding the bell curve of users, when you were conducting user research, were you prioritizing feedback from intermediate users?
Maybe
or
not
where
without.
Were you providing?
I don't think that we ever went through a process and said, they're beginners, let's not listen to those people. But I think that just in processing the feedback, you kind of learn, should we listen to this person? I don't think they understood, right? We've had people using the product who aren't actually designers, right? We just had a research synthesis call last week where we were looking at how people were publishing things to InVision. And we have, I could show it because that presentation was Studio, right? We have this little publish button here. When you hover it, it tells you InVision. We thought, everybody's gonna get that. She wasn't a day-to-day designer, and she could not find publishing, right? She's up here going, where the hell is publishing? It's that big share button right there. So that feedback, some of that did come in, right? Because although we believe that this is, most people, most intermediates understand that this is how you share this thing, beginners were still fairly confused, and it was enough of a trade-off. It doesn't really impact the flow or professionals too much that we're adding that into the menu. So it's kind of like a case-by-case basis. We do evaluate, what is that user's skill level, and should we give a lot of weight to what they're saying in changing this? Another example is we hear from a lot of people who are what we consider a little more on the beginner side of things, that we collapsed tools inside of this one little menu, right? And some people were confused about how, I can't even figure out how to draw a rectangle. And our assumption is that most intermediates know you just hit the R key, right? And we've been asked many times to pop this out and show this, but we don't think it's worth the cost of doing that because it impacts professionals, and now they've got to deal with all these extra icons, and what happens when you select something and you've got all these other icons here, and you just have this really heavy interface. So we're not listening to that piece of feedback. We're keeping those consolidated because we think, generally speaking, most people understand that. Yeah.
I know typography is often a big part of design. Will type styles also be coming to Studio?
Absolutely. Though we are taking our time on that because we're rethinking them a little bit. We're not just kind of, here's another example where we're not just kind of stealing what's going on. And I won't give too much away here because it's still in development, but instead of setting type styles on every text layer and every text layer can have one type style, you can basically build up a cascade of styles so that you can build systems in smarter ways, right? So one style could define the font family and one could define the font size, right? We believe that's a better way for systems design. And so that's one area that we're taking our time because we want to get it right. And we're also kind of diverting from what people are used to. I hope that I'm not getting myself in trouble, Eric. Okay. Who cares? Don't tweet that out.
All right. Well, I think that just, do we have one more?
One more.
I was mesmerized by the opening slide with the interlocking circles and stuff, and I just was curious, how is it done?
How was it made?
Yeah.
It's a bunch of SVG circles with some CSS animation on them and some blend modes. Yeah. Thank you.
Is that some multiply action going on?
It is a multiply blend mode. Could you tell that was function AB? Thank you.
As we all know it and love it.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Yeah, thanks for coming out. Thanks to InVision and to Tom and to Capital One. So we have a few minutes if you guys want to mingle in the atrium, but we'll be sort of shooing folks out around 8:45, 9. Thank you so much for coming.